There comes a time in every man's life when he wakes up, and something is different. He doesn't crave the same things. He doesn't chase the same people. He doesn't answer calls that once disturbed his peace. And that subtle shift, that silent evolution, it shakes her, because you're not the same man anymore, and that scares her. You've grown past her games that used to be the hook, the cycle, the dance you both played in the shadows. Her pulling back, you stepping closer. Her going cold, you over-explaining. Her giving you silence, and you filling it with paragraphs of justification, pleading, and desperation disguised as affection. You remember it. Every man who's been through it does. The passive-aggressive texts, the sudden mood swings, the fake indifference, the way she would withhold affection just to see if you'd break, and you did back then. You broke every time because you thought love meant proving yourself. You thought that if you just showed her how committed you were, she'd finally soften, that the more you gave, the more she'd respect you. But instead, she grew colder, more distant, more in control, because you were giving her your power, piece by piece, every time you responded emotionally to her games. But now, you don't play anymore. You don't chase breadcrumbs of affection. You don't decode mixed signals or try to read between the lines of her silence. You don't ask twice. You don't beg to be understood. You observe, you watch, you analyze. Not through emotion, but through clarity. You've evolved from the reactive man to the reflective one. You no longer dance for her validation. You recognize the pattern now, the late replies, the strategic withdrawal of warmth, the sudden flirtations with other men, posted just barely subtle enough for you to notice. And instead of reacting, you do something far more powerful. You disengage. Not with bitterness, but with self-respect, because you've realized that emotional games are a test of your control, not your love. She notices the difference. You used to be the guy blowing up her phone when she pulled away. Now, you don't even flinch. She sees your online status and wonders why you haven't messaged. She posts something vague, aimed at getting your attention, and you don't bite. Because you don't operate on desperation anymore. You operate on value, and your value has increased. Because you're no longer a boy chasing affection. You're a man guarding his peace. There's something deeply unsettling to a woman who once had you wrapped around her finger, and suddenly finds herself in the presence of a man she no longer controls. It shakes her, because the predictable cycle is broken. The safety of your emotional reactions is gone. She can't provoke you. She can't guilt you. She can't lure you back with a photo, a memory, or a subtle message that used to make your heart race. You don't react the same because you're not the same. You've developed an inner calm that no longer gets disturbed by someone else's emotional chaos. And that shift, that evolution, it's not just emotional, it's spiritual. You've become the man who doesn't need external validation to feel whole. You've become the man who walks away, not to manipulate, but because staying would mean disrespecting himself. You've become the man who would rather be alone than confused, who would rather have silence than play guessing games with someone who never speaks plainly. You've become grounded, solid, stoic, and when a man becomes that still, that anchored in who he is, he becomes deeply unpredictable to a woman who was used to pulling his strings. It's not about revenge. It's not about teaching her a lesson. It's about elevation. She's still playing checkers, and you've moved on to chess. You're not avoiding her. You're prioritizing yourself. You're not being cold. You're being clear. You've stepped into a space where love is no longer measured by how much you can tolerate, but by how well you can protect your own soul. And the woman who once felt powerful through confusion now feels powerless in your clarity. Because you've grown, you've leveled up. You've walked away from the noise, and she's left wondering how she lost access to a man she thought she could always control. You've reclaimed your masculine frame. For a long time, you didn't even know you'd lost it. You thought being accommodating, being always available, always agreeable, was what made you a good man. You thought keeping the peace meant sacrificing your instincts. You abandoned your mission to please her mood. You softened your edges to avoid conflict. You made her your purpose, thinking that would bring harmony, but something inside you began to ache, not in a loud, violent way, but in a quiet, persistent hum that wouldn't go away. You felt it when you stopped hitting the gym because she wanted more time. You felt it when you stopped pushing yourself professionally because she complained you were too focused on your goals. You felt it every time you backed down from speaking your truth because you didn't want to rock the boat. Slowly, without realizing it, you traded in your masculine power for temporary validation. But then it clicked. Maybe it was a moment, maybe it was a build-up of months or years, but one day you woke up and realized that a man disconnected from his mission becomes a servant to someone else's, and that's what you had become. Not a partner, not a leader, but a man orbiting her emotions, tiptoeing through her moods, waiting for her to tell you who you were allowed to be. That man is gone. You've reclaimed the frame, not by becoming aggressive, but by becoming immovable. You're no longer shaken by her storms. You're no longer derailed by her doubts. Your schedule is no longer rearranged to accommodate emotional chaos. You are centered now, grounded in your purpose. You go to the gym because strength is your language. You read, you build, you meditate because growth is your standard. You do not shrink yourself to make her feel taller. You do not suppress your masculinity to make her feel more in control. You walk in purpose. And that walk, it's firm, it's direct, it's unapologetic. Now she feels it. She senses the shift. She used to be able to sway your decisions with a pout, with a silent treatment, with a crisis she created to pull your focus. But now you don't flinch, you don't cancel your plans, you don't rearrange your life, you're no longer reactive, you lead, you've re-established the frame, and she either aligns with it or she falls away. That's not arrogance, that's structure. That's what your masculine energy demands. This frame you carry now, it's not a facade, it's not performance. It's the result of discipline. It's the product of pain you transmuted into focus. And that scares her, not because you've become someone cruel, but because you've become someone complete. You're no longer orbiting her. She's now orbiting you. And for a woman used to being the center, that reversal is unsettling. It forces her to ask a question she never had to ask before. Where do I fit in his world now that I'm no longer his world? But you're not concerned with the answer. You're not shrinking yourself to help her find comfort. You've done that before, and it only weakened the bond. You understand now that a woman truly respects a man when she sees that he cannot be moved from his core, when she knows that his sense of self is not negotiable, that his path is not paused for love, but that love is invited to walk beside him, if it can keep up. Your masculine frame isn't rigid, it's resolved. You don't control with force, you lead with presence. You no longer prove your worth, you live it, you embody it, you are it. And for the first time in a long time, she doesn't know where she stands, because the man who once depended on her reactions to define himself has become the man who defines himself without her approval. That presence, that strength, that certainty, it terrifies her, because now she's dealing with a man, not a boy, not a project, not someone she can shape. a man who has reclaimed his masculine frame and refuses to give it up again. You've mastered emotional detachment. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It doesn't mean you're cold, heartless, or numb. Quite the opposite. It means you've finally put your emotions in their rightful place beneath your control. You've turned the volume down on the chaos. You've learned that just because you feel something doesn't mean you must act on it. You've learned to pause, to breathe, to observe. You've learned the power of holding your silence when once you would have exploded in frustration. The power of walking away, not because you're done, but because you refuse to keep negotiating your self-worth. You've become emotionally sovereign, and that is power. She doesn't understand it at first. The lack of reaction confuses her. She throws her usual jabs, criticisms wrapped in sarcasm, provocations laced with passive aggression. But you don't respond the way you used to. You don't raise your voice. You don't fall into the trap of defending yourself against accusations that were never about truth, but about control. You don't chase clarity from someone who thrives on confusion. Instead, you step back. You analyze. You assess the pattern, not the moment. You recognize the emotional loop, and instead of running it again, you exit. That's what emotional detachment is. The ability to step outside the moment and see the game for what it is. You've stopped arguing because you understand that most arguments aren't about resolution. They're about pulling you into chaos, and chaos thrives on your participation. But when you remove your energy, when you stop feeding the cycle, the chaos dies. And in its place, there's nothing but silence. And that silence speaks volumes. She feels the difference. You used to text back immediately. Now you take your time. You used to explain yourself in paragraphs. Now you say less, and what you do say carries more weight. You no longer fight to be understood. You've learned that your peace is more valuable than her temporary approval. You no longer panic when she pulls away, because you understand that distance reveals truth. You let people leave now not as punishment but as protection. You don't beg, you don't chase, you observe, you respond when necessary, but never from emotion, only from awareness. This doesn't mean you don't love. It means you love from a place of wholeness, not dependency. You've developed the strength to walk away from anything that disrupts your inner stability. You've realized that your emotional world is yours to govern, and no one, no matter how beautiful, how seductive, how familiar, has the right to dictate it. That terrifies her, not because you're cold, but because you're untouchable, because her chaos no longer moves you, because her silence no longer threatens you, because her presence no longer defines you. And for someone who once held power through your emotional reactions, your calm is unsettling. It reminds her that she no longer holds the strings. You've cut them, and in doing so, you've reclaimed something priceless, your peace. You've stopped needing her. That shift is so subtle on the outside, but it's monumental on the inside. Most men don't realize how deep their need for a woman runs until they try to walk away from her, until they try to sit with themselves in silence, until they look at their phone and resist the urge to text. That's when the truth hits. You never truly loved her. You were dependent on what she gave you. The attention, the softness, the illusion of being wanted. You didn't crave the woman, you craved what being with her said about you. You thought her presence was proof that you mattered, that you were enough. But deep down, you were just trying to escape yourself. You built your identity around being chosen. You measured your worth by how often she reached out, how much she needed you, how close she stayed. You believed that love was about constantly being available, constantly giving, constantly proving. You accepted breadcrumbs because you feared the hunger of being alone. You tolerated the bare minimum because you were starving for connection. And every time she gave you a sliver of affection, it felt like salvation. But now that need is gone. You've sat in your own silence long enough to understand it. You've looked at the walls, heard your own thoughts, faced the boredom, the anxiety, the longing, and instead of running from it, you embraced it. You didn't numb it with distractions. You didn't run to the next woman, the next high, the next text. You let it burn, and in that fire, something inside you was forged, a new version of yourself, a man who doesn't need her, not because he hates her, not because he's closed off, but because he's finally full. Now she feels it, the difference in your presence, the calm in your tone, the absence of pressure. You're not chasing her anymore. You're not trying to convince her of your worth. You're not bending yourself to fit into her world. You've stopped putting her on a pedestal because you've built one for yourself. You no longer crave to be seen because you finally see yourself. You no longer beg to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And that changes everything. She used to feel powerful, not because she controlled you consciously, but because your need gave her leverage. She knew she could pull away and you'd chase. She knew she could be inconsistent and you'd still stay. She knew that your fear of losing her outweighed your self-respect. But that fear is gone now, replaced with clarity, replaced with boundaries, replaced with an internal compass that no longer points to her for direction. You've started showing up for yourself. You work out not to impress her, but to respect your body. You pursue your purpose not to prove something, but because you've realized it's what makes you feel alive. You've developed routines that don't include her, built habits that she's not the center of, created a life that moves with or without her, and that independence, it speaks louder than any words. It tells her the truth in a way that stings, because it shows her she's no longer essential. She's optional. You stopped romanticizing her. You stopped replaying the highlights of the relationship and started looking at the full picture. The inconsistencies, the emotional withdrawal, the disrespect you overlooked just to keep her around. You realized that what you thought was love was often just attachment rooted in insecurity. And when that realization sank in, the illusion broke. You stopped needing her because you finally started needing you. You stopped chasing her validation because you began validating yourself. You stopped fearing her absence because you finally found peace in your own presence. And now you're dangerous, not in a reckless, aggressive way, but in a composed, grounded way. Because you've broken free from the one thing that held you back, dependency, she no longer has the emotional upper hand. She can no longer manipulate you with attention, with withdrawal, with the false promise of love. Because you've stopped seeing her as the source and started seeing yourself as the foundation. And when a man stops needing a woman to feel whole, he becomes the version of himself that no one saw coming. The version that can walk away and never look back. The version that doesn't chase love, but attracts it effortlessly because he no longer chases what doesn't match his value. You've developed a calm that she can't shake. It didn't happen overnight. This kind of calm is not something you fake or perform. It's not a persona you adopt to impress or manipulate. It's not bravado. It's not indifference masquerading as strength. This calm is different. It's the kind that comes only after chaos, after loss, after heartbreak, after watching the things you once held dear slip through your fingers, no matter how hard you tried to hold on. You didn't become calm because life was gentle with you. You became calm because life tested you to the point where being reactive would have destroyed you. You went through the fire and came out quieter. Not weaker, quieter, more still, more focused. She remembers the version of you that used to react, the one who raised his voice, who sent long texts, who over-explained, who apologized for things he didn't even do wrong just to keep the peace. She remembers how easily your emotions used to rise to the surface, how she could create distance and you'd run toward her, how she could use silence to make you feel insecure, how she could test your limits and you'd bend every time. But now she's face to face with a different man, one who no longer reacts but responds, one who doesn't rush to fill the silence, one who doesn't feel the need to fix every emotional mess that wasn't his to clean up in the first place. Your calm is not the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. You still feel, you're still human, but now you've trained your emotions to serve you rather than enslave you. You've learned to observe before you speak. You've developed the patience to let her energy reveal itself instead of jumping to conclusions. You've learned to stay still in moments when everything in you wants to react. That's what makes it powerful, because it's intentional, because it's earned, and because it cannot be faked. She doesn't know what to do with this version of you. Her old tactics don't work anymore. She can try to bait you, guilt you, question your feelings, accuse you of not caring, but none of it gets the reaction it used to. You don't get defensive, you don't engage in emotional tug-of-war, you just remain composed, you answer what needs answering, you leave what needs to be left, you don't take the bait, and that restraint. That stillness, it's disarming, because the truth is, most people are addicted to emotional drama. They feed off of reactions. They feel validated when they can control your emotions. But when you remove yourself from that loop, when you show that you're no longer moved by chaos, you take away their power. She no longer knows how to penetrate your energy. She can't throw you off balance with passive-aggressive remarks. She can't make you chase with temporary withdrawal. She can't disturb your inner state because you've built it on something far deeper than attention. This calm doesn't just affect your relationship. It spills into everything. Your walk changes, your tone lowers, your presence becomes heavier, more grounded. You move slower, but with more certainty. You don't feel the need to prove yourself anymore, because your energy speaks louder than your words ever could. You don't overcompensate, you don't perform, you simply asterisk our asterisk, and that kind of presence, that still grounded masculinity, is rare, it's magnetic, it's powerful, and it's threatening to someone who once thrived on your emotional instability. She may not say it out loud, but she feels it. The man who once used to be an open book is now unreadable, not because he's hiding, but because he's no longer explaining himself to people who never valued his truth in the first place. Your peace has become your priority. Your silence has become a weapon, not one used to harm, but to protect, to create space, to show that you've reached a point in life where not everything deserves your energy, your words, your time. This calm is not passive, it's deeply active. It's the result of work you've done on yourself in private, of conversations you've had with your own darkness, of wounds you've stitched up without an audience. It's the product of boundaries reinforced over time. You've learned to detach without closing your heart, to love without losing yourself, to listen without absorbing someone else's chaos. You've become your own center of gravity, and that makes you unshakable. She may never understand the depths of your transformation. She may miss the old version of you, the one she could predict, provoke, and manipulate. But that man is gone. Not because he was weak, but because he outgrew the environment that required him to be. The new man, the one sitting in calm, in quiet strength, in self-possession, that man is a force. Not one that forces others to change, but one that forces others to question how they ever mistook emotional instability for love. You've become unpredictable, and that unpredictability isn't about playing games. It's about no longer fitting into the box she once kept you in. For a long time, you were predictable because you were consistent in your need. You chased. You apologized first. You checked in. You tried to reassure her, even when she was the one pulling away. Your patterns were readable. If she gave you attention, you lit up. If she withdrew, you panicked. If she was upset, you absorbed it like it was your fault. That made you easy to control, easy to understand, and easy to take for granted. But not anymore. Now your unpredictability stems from your growth. You no longer react based on emotion. You respond based on principle. Some days you're available, other days you're immersed in your work, your goals, your own solitude. She can no longer predict how you'll respond to her silence. She used to be sure that if she pulled away, you'd follow. Now you don't flinch, you don't double. Text, you don't chase, you observe. And that silence she once used to feel powerful. It's met with a stronger silence, yours. You've shifted from always being the one to initiate to letting her wonder, letting her feel the space, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of your new reality. You're no longer obsessed with maintaining the illusion of closeness. You've accepted the truth that closeness without respect is suffocating, and you refuse to suffocate anymore. Your attention is no longer guaranteed. It's no longer automatic. It has to be earned, and she's not used to that. She's used to the version of you who kept giving even when she stopped appreciating. Now, the faucet's not broken, it's controlled. And that control, it makes her question everything. You've also become unpredictable in the way you carry yourself. You used to be one-dimensional around her, the version of you that existed only within the boundaries of the relationship. Now, she sees glimpses of sides she never bothered to get to know, or that you never had the strength to show. The man who's passionate about something outside of her. The man who disappears into his work, into the gym, into his solitude, not to escape her, but because he no longer centers his life around her presence. You've become your own priority, and that shift has made you infinitely more interesting and infinitely more difficult to pin down. Before, she could anticipate your moves. She could sense your insecurities, and she knew how to navigate around them to get what she wanted. But now your energy is different. You've closed the gap between stimulus and reaction. You no longer wear your emotions on your sleeve. You no longer offer explanations just to soothe her uncertainty. You've realized that true power lies in silence, in restraint, in the ability to remain grounded while others scramble to understand you. You've become comfortable being misunderstood. She's trying to adapt to this new you, but she's playing an old game on a new board. Her tactics no longer get the same results. The moods, the sudden detachment, the subtle guilt trips, they bounce off you now. You see them, but you don't engage. You've upgraded your perception. You spot patterns. You notice cycles. And more importantly, you don't respond just to soothe her or stabilize the dynamic. You allow the space to reveal what needs to be revealed. You let the silence stretch long enough for the truth to surface. Your unpredictability is not chaos, it's evolution. You've grown into a man who lives by internal rhythm, not external pressure. Some days you're deeply present. Other days you vanish into your purpose. You no longer feel obligated to be on call. Emotionally, you no longer hand over the keys to your energy just because someone else wants access. And this shift makes her uneasy, not because you're wrong, but because she's never had to earn this version of you. You've stepped out of the role of the predictable partner and into the role of the sovereign man. The man who isn't ruled by guilt, neediness, or habit. The man who can pivot, adapt, disappear, and return, all without losing himself, and that scares her, because what she once thought was stability, your predictability, was actually just your dependence. Now that the dependence is gone and all that's left is choice, she doesn't know what to expect, and that uncertainty, it forces her to step up or step out. You've changed the dynamic without speaking a word. You've let your actions show that you're no longer where she left you. You've stopped announcing your worth, and now she has to sense it. And that uncertainty, that inability to predict your next move, creates a shift in power. Not one you wield with arrogance, but one you carry with calm assurance. You've become the kind of man who doesn't need to tell people he's different. They feel it, they see it, they experience it in the silence, in the pauses, in the way you no longer fill in the gaps with desperate energy. Now she has to sit with her own questions, wonder where she stands, reflect on what changed, because the man she used to understand no longer fits inside the patterns she designed. And that unpredictability, it doesn't make you dangerous in a toxic way, it makes you uncontainable in a powerful way. She knows now that you can walk away without a dramatic exit, that you can stay without losing yourself, that you can care without being controlled, that you can love without abandoning your sense of self, and that realization reshapes everything. You've stopped explaining yourself, and that silence is deafening to someone who used to feed on your need to be understood. In the past, you over-explained everything, your intentions, your feelings, your whereabouts, your decisions, because you wanted peace, you wanted clarity. You wanted her to see the full picture so she wouldn't misunderstand you. But that compulsion to constantly justify yourself wasn't strength. It was rooted in insecurity. It was the fear of being misjudged, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being abandoned if she didn't see things your way. So you poured yourself out. You made yourself an open book, even when it was costing you your peace. She got used to that. She got used to having full access to your internal world. She got used to being the emotional compass that you deferred to. Every disagreement became an opportunity for you to explain in paragraphs. Every shift in energy had you offering apologies and reassurances before she even asked. You were so scared of losing her that you gave her a front row seat to every doubt, every flaw, every justification for who you were. And because she had that access, she knew how to control the narrative. She knew exactly what strings to pull to keep you explaining, defending, rationalizing. But something changed. You stopped justifying yourself to someone who never really tried to understand you in the first place. You stopped explaining your boundaries, your growth, your silence, your distance. Not because you've become bitter, but because you've become selective. Because you've learned that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your evolution. Especially not someone who only clapped when it served their ego. Now, she's met with silence where there used to be essays, with stillness where there used to be emotional labor. She can sense it. You're no longer offering explanations to soothe her insecurities. You're no longer trying to fix a dynamic that kept you small. You've realized that if someone truly values you, they don't need a 10-step breakdown of your boundaries. They'll feel it in your energy. You've stepped into a quieter kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to be validated, defended, or broadcasted. This new version of you no longer fears being misunderstood. You're not trying to win arguments anymore. You're not trying to make her see your side just so you can feel safe again. You've let go of that need. You've accepted that peace sometimes looks like walking away, sometimes looks like not replying, sometimes looks like letting someone sit with their own confusion. And that detachment isn't coldness, it's wisdom. You've learned that over-explaining yourself is a form of self-abandonment. Every time you went into emotional detail trying to prove your good intentions, you were really just trying to be chosen. Every time you bent your truth to fit her comfort, you were betraying your own. Now, your silence protects what you've built inside. You no longer hand your truth over to someone who's only looking for leverage. You keep it close, guarded, sacred. She notices, she feels the shift. She asks what's wrong, tries to provoke, tries to get a reaction. She's not used to this version of you, the version who doesn't feel the need to unpack everything, who's okay with not being liked, who walks away without turning it into a lecture or a plea, the version who chooses peace over validation. This version of you is hard to control because you've stopped placing your self-worth in her hands. You've reclaimed it, piece by piece, in the silence she used to fill with drama, and it changes everything. Your silence forces her to reflect in ways your explanations never did. When you talked, she focused on your words. Now that you're quiet, she's left with herself, and that's a harder confrontation. She has to sit with the echo of your absence, with the realization that you no longer feel the need to involve her in every emotional shift you experience. You've outgrown the need for approval, and that makes your presence heavier, more respected, more mysterious. You've started to embody the kind of man who speaks less and says more. When you do speak, it's with clarity, not desperation. With certainty, not persuasion. You speak to express, not to convince. And that change is felt in every interaction. You've become intentional. And when a man becomes intentional, he becomes unshakable. This isn't about being emotionally unavailable. It's about emotional sovereignty. You're not closed off. You're just no longer wide open to those who have proven they can't handle the weight of your truth. You've created emotional boundaries, not walls. You've realized that people who genuinely care about you will seek to understand you without needing an instruction manual. And those who don't, they're not your responsibility. So you stopped explaining. You stopped performing emotional CPR on a connection that kept draining you. And in doing so, you became more grounded, more centered. You learned that silence can be the most powerful statement a man can make, because it says, I know who I am, I don't need you to. And now that's what truly scares her, not the silence itself, but the man you've become within it. A man who no longer chases approval, who no longer begs to be seen, who no longer sacrifices his dignity for temporary closeness. You've evolved into someone she can no longer predict, control, or define, and in that quiet, steady strength, she finally realizes she's standing in front of a man she can't play, only respect or lose.